This was shocking for me. Absolutely. Like I can't
It's
even imagine.
Huge stigma of women being on periods, but it's the same men who isolate women in their homes to be away from them because they are menstruating, who then go and have sex with the sex workers because that's okay. So yeah, we're dealing with
Shocking.
problems that are very, very it's intersectional. That's why I can't
Yeah.
say like, okay, you know, periods or menstrual health is something that we have to work on.
Welcome, Radhika, and I'm really excited to talk to you. I have known you for years, since the time we connected as curators on Global Shapers. Your story is truly inspirational, not just for me, but for many others who look at you. And you set the right kind of example for the generations to come and work in driving a positive change in India. And it's not easy for anybody to leave everything behind and just work for causes that are going to impact many lives. And you have successfully done that with all your ventures, with all the effort and all the you've been through a lot of difficult phases also, but you just shine through. And I'm so grateful to have you on board today. Thank you for graciously accepting this invitation and coming here. Would you like to say something to our audience?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I think it's always lovely and wonderful to speak to you, collaborate with you on the works that we've done together. And I'm excited to talk about the journey that I've had so far, the challenges, just the process that it was and it is. So yeah, excited, and thank you so much for having me.
So shall we begin with the interesting questions which I have for you?
Sure.
It's all about social change, it's all about driving positive impact, but sometimes it is perceived as, just doing time pass or just doing like a side hustle. And today you're going to break those stereotypes beautifully, because I've seen you breaking them every day. My first question to you is that how do you delve into such deep level work? And I know for sure that this comes from your childhood, your background, the way you were brought up, and the way you took these examples from your upbringing to shape you in the person you are today. So can you tell me more about that?
That's a great question to, I think, begin with. I remember how I was as a child and what I did as a child. I was a single child, so my parents just let me be, and I was playing with anyone and everyone around. There was never any difference in who I could play with, who I could eat with. And just seeing, I think, my parents, my family, how they are inclined towards just contributing towards the society. I do not like to use this term as well because it's not really contributing, but I know how my father's journey has really, really inspired me, from the kind of background he came to having everything that he has right now. And I think it was always the idea of him to have a child was to make sure that the child does not feel like they're the most important person in this world, that they're a part of this world, and how they need to perceive others or just do something towards the society was ingrained. And I think that has shaped a lot of things that I'm doing today, or just the kind of person I am, maybe. So that's been the journey, and I was born in a town called Jabalpur, which is in Madhya Pradesh, post which we moved to Pune when I was about 7-8 years of age, because of better educational opportunities and also better business opportunities for my father. And I think having that context of growing up in the initial years in a smaller town and then suddenly coming to a big city, which was a big surprise for me, and also a misfit is what I felt on most days. I was in not a very fancy school in the city that I was born in. Here I was immediately put into an English medium school where I struggled to make friends or even speak
Yeah.
a sentence in Hindi, for example,
Yeah.
in English, for example. But I think all of that has shaped me now, and just the journey that it has been so far. But I think the upbringing with the humbleness and the reminder that you're not the center of attention for anyone and you need to be there for other people is what has framed the journey.
I think I can relate to you a lot with this because my upbringing also has been into the rural space. Like I was born and brought up in a rural setup, and then until my 12th I was there. And then I was friends with people from different walks of life. It kind of makes you aware of the problems which everyone faces, and it makes you grateful for the opportunities and the platform which you've got. And with both of us being coming from the similar backgrounds, what we feel constantly that has shaped up is that we know that we have to make the table longer. Based on the values which we have learned from our parents since we were growing up. So for you, what does Radhika Dhingra mean today? Who is she today?
I think I'm an environmentalist is what I define myself with. I've studied environmental sciences, and that's something I'm really, really passionate about. I'm definitely inclined towards the social sector. I love being on ground and trying to bring about that small change. But at the same time, I feel like I don't know if I'm doing this to create the bigger impact, or is it the selfish reason why it makes me really happy. I don't know if I'm bringing about the massive change that I envision maybe 20 years down the line. But at this moment, it's really giving me the satisfaction that I need, that I have done something. It could be just with a small conversation that I, for example, have with a young girl or a woman and just understand their perspective. But that's making me happy. So I think in a lot of ways, I'm also selfish in that aspect. And that's why the social sector is something that keeps me happy and motivated. And the sense of that, okay, this is what I want to do.
But that's something which not everybody opts for, right? Like when you said environmental sciences, and then from there transitioning to a journey towards founding Badlaav, you know, and being in your 20s while deciding that I am going to go for a business space, or somebody will go for engineering, or somebody will go for science, which is a safe background to be in. So what was the base, or how did you at that early age, when you are in your 20s, decide to form Badlaav?
I think in a lot of sense, I was also very conventional that way. The idea was to pursue medicine and take that journey, science of course. But I think while preparing for the entrance, I remember when I was in grade 12, I just realized that this is not something I can do. Not that it was difficult or I had to study so much, just imagining that I would invest 10, 12 years studying before I could start working is something that itched me a lot. And I think just the kind of background I come from or the kind of upbringing I've had the itch to start working. And be in that social sector. Choosing medicine was also one way of doing that. But when I realized it's going to take a lot of time and investment from my end before I can actually start working, was something that was not convincing me. And hence I was exploring what is it that I can do if I'm not doing medicine, because unfortunately I was not exposed to other career options. And environmental sciences is something that I came across, and I was like, okay, maybe this sounds very interesting. Let me complete my undergrad and see if this works out for me. Thankfully, my family was supportive and I could pursue that. But while I was studying that, I kind of found my calling, and I understood that this is the field that I want to be in. So the journey initially had been very conventional. This is what I should or I must do.
Yeah.
Lack of better options as well.
Should, would, could.
Yeah, but I think it worked out just fine as of now.
Was there any motivation or that inner voice that came from your childhood that no, I need to get into this? Because you said that you chose it, you knew that it was your calling. Was it due to any experience you had faced during childhood? You had seen something that made you make this decision for you?
I don't remember any particular instance, but just everyday things. It could be very small things in families, within friends that you see across as well. And I am this person who is very vocal or wants to have my opinion out there, and I want it to be heard.
Correct.
So in very simple things like how we celebrate our festivals, how women are always just supposed to be a part of the kitchen work, for example. Or how there are unsaid expectations of how one should dress, behave, sit, was something that always annoyed me. And while I come from a fairly liberal and progressive family, I think these are things that you just can't escape, according to me, in a desi setting.
True.
So although it was a very comfortable environment, it still itched me, and I saw other things happening around where I was like, okay, this is what I want to maybe talk about. I don't know if I can change these things, but maybe having a conversation with you, having conversation with other friends might bring something up, and that's what I always wanted to see if I could do.
And I think the more examples are there in front of women or men of doing the unconventional thing in a very conventional setup is something which is going to motivate a lot of things. So these conversations are also very important to spark that thought process in anybody's mind, and I'm glad that you're talking about that right now. Now my question to you is, this is all fine, you wanted to talk about it, you founded Badlaav, but once you have a foundation in place and you're in your 20s, when you're starting it off, it's not just an NGO, right? Like, you have to structurally place it. If you are looking at it as a career for you, that's what you said about, like, I didn't want it to go the conventional route, but I wanted to it was my calling. So how do you structurally place it? What is your long-term goal with Badlaav? What were the challenges which you faced while placing Badlaav in a conventional world? Like, how was it?
I think just starting Badlaav was all due to the fact that I had that privilege to be able to do this without really thinking about how I'm going to provide my family financially, for example. And that's why the decision was easier. But of course, having said that, again, everything comes down to having the structure, building the organization from scratch. And I think that was just a process. I sometimes also felt that maybe I jumped into this too soon, not having the enough experience. But I think that also helped me learn so many things on my own. I'm a very strong believer of planning hota rahega, let's start and plan simultaneously. Because when it's just the structure that we are building, I mean just planning, the execution can be very, very different. You don't know the on-ground reality or the challenges that can come up. So I think that's the belief that I went with, that I know I'm not experienced, I know I don't have the expertise, but I'm ready to build that. And the attitude of being able to unlearn and learn is, I think, what helped. And then structuring was just, I think, the process, and it still is
the flow.
Is what I believe.
Usually people say that when you want to enter a CSR or when you want to get into such field, it also needs a 40-year-old person to be getting involved in that, and you started in your 20s. And I remember an interview where Navya was also saying, if we don't start talking now about these causes, even if we lack experience, who's going to talk for us later on.
Absolutely.
It's all about the environmental changes, the things which we are facing, which our previous generations didn't face. So I like the factor that you went with the flow and eventually figured it out. So currently, how does Badlaav work? Like how many people are there? How do you function daily? Because you talked about the CSR thing and the structuring of, repurposing the donations and the thing to the right causes, to finding the right people who really require this help. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so Badlaav Social Reform Foundation, like I was speaking to you, it's a Section 8 company. We are an NGO and we have a team of 12 people at the moment. We work actively with schools and colleges, with the youth on the topics of environmental and social issues. We are also working in urban slum communities in Pune and around Baramati as well, in rural areas. The idea is to build a sustainable system where the community themselves are efficient and they have the means and resources to solve MHM problems or the menstrual health and management issues that we speak or focus on. And we do this by training the community mobilizers to be menstrual health educators. With the donations or the fundings that we receive, we subsidize the sustainable menstrual products, for example, the cloth pads and menstrual cups. And this is what the focus has been so far. But as an organization, we believe in the intersection of social and environmental issues, and every project or every work that we do is going to have this niche.
That's beautiful. And I like the fact that you spoke about circular economy, where you have to, even if it is villages, you have to create change makers, the permanent change makers. Example, if there are ASHA workers or women, you are going to educate them about the menstrual hygiene or break the taboo around menstruation. So I wanted to delve a little deeper about the menstruation topic. There has been a lot of cultural diversity in our country, and then comes the menstrual taboo. When we were working together on one of the initiatives, it was shocking for me to know about certain facts that people still believe that sanitary napkins should be burned away, creating massive pollution, the landfills and all of that getting polluted, and there were very strange taboos. Give me examples about that, because when we were talking about it, it was shocking to know about these particular taboos. And how do you deal with these things?
Yeah, I think every time, it's been 4.5 years now, but every time I am facilitating a session or speaking to someone about this, I come across a new taboo. So it's always very interesting and at the same time annoying. But just to give a few examples, I think the fact that menstrual blood is dirty, and hence the person is isolated from their household for how many ever days that they are bleeding, is still very, very common practice in India in general. It's not just in the rural areas, it's very much present in the cities as well. And it's across classes. With this, there are also taboos of things that you can eat, not eat. For example, pickle or papayas. These are things that you shouldn't eat, is what people tell them. Pickle gets spoiled, papad ko haath lagaya to kharab ho jayega. Not watering plants is very common during
I didn't know about that.
Menstruating days. Or in some cultures, you should take a bath on the first day itself. When I say take a bath, head bath. So पूरा सर से नहाना है.
क्यों?
ताकि आप साफ हो जाओ. क्योंकि आप periods पे हो तो you are अशुद्ध, impure, whatever. कुछ कल्चर्स में ऐसा है कि नहीं, अगर आपने सर से नहाया तो आपका ब्लड फ्लो कम हो जाएगा. सो टेक अ बाथ, बट सिर गीला नहीं करना चाहिए. सो देयर आर डिफरेंट थिंग्स दैट maybe according to the context that they come from or whatever they've heard from their older generations that have just been passed on without any logic or reasoning. And no matter how hard we try, this is not something that we can break in a day's time and be like, अच्छा अभी मैंने बता दिया है, कल से आप ये सब मत करो. That's not possible.
It doesn't happen that way.
But yeah, our attempt is to make people understand the scientific process of what menstrual cycle is. Why are you bleeding every month? And once the people understand that, they themselves understand that, okay, these are some things that have been going on and have no reason to it.
Correct.
They just can't give it up because they are habitual to it.
True.
But I think that understanding has started to be there in the society, and slowly they'll forget the taboos or leave those taboos and
you know what I heard when last time we were in, I think Shirsufar or somewhere, when you're doing these campaigns, one of the women, we were just having a very candid conversation with them, and they were like, no, we don't believe in using sanitary napkins, we want to use cloths, or like, because it can be washed off, because if we use it we have to burn it away. I said, why do you want to burn it away? So she said that, if any insect, if we throw it in a dustbin or in a landfill, imagine, if any insect touches it, or if a snake crosses, they believe that the whole family will not be fertile henceforth.
That's a very common belief. Even if a dog touches it or sees it, that's also a belief that fertility would be impacted. So that's just unfortunate. But I also feel like in rural areas, we've still not been able to establish a proper waste management system. We haven't been able to do that in the cities either, but at least there is somebody coming and collecting your waste, for example. Correct. In rural areas, that's still not, it doesn't exist. So how do they deal with that kind of waste if not burn?
So example,
there are a lot of things,
No, but like, how do you make this all inclusive then? Because we need men to be educated alongside women. You can't just go and talk to women, but I've seen you educating the entire, when you were doing campaigns in villages or slum areas, you make sure that it is inclusive. You make aware that everybody is involved, is knowing the sort of thing. So how do you make these things inclusive?
I think by speaking to the people that you're working with. It's not possible for me, coming from all the privilege that I come from, to go into a slum community and expect those people to adopt to the changes that I'm talking about. Because I haven't experienced using a public washroom on a daily basis and the challenges that they might be facing. I haven't experienced the issue of waste management firsthand, because for me, there's somebody coming at home, I'm giving them the waste and it's out of my sight. What's happening is not my concern after that. So I think to be inclusive, you need to be able to talk to and understand the people that you're working with. If I can share a small example, we are talking about sustainable menstruation, menstrual cups. We had a chance to work with a group of sex workers in Pune, and I presumed that for them, because they are comfortable with their bodies, they know their anatomy well, they perhaps will be comfortable with using a menstrual cup. And that's what we were taking a session. We spoke to them about the other alternatives that exist in the market right now. We spoke to them about period panties, cloth pads, menstrual cups. And I had presumed that they would opt for a menstrual cup because they are more aware. But the reason that came up was, every time there's a customer coming, they are not going to be removing the cup, doing their business and then reinserting the cup. Because they are not working on the days that they are menstruating. So for me, I was like, this is not something that I even anticipated, because that's not me. I mean, I'm working with a different set of people, and I can't presume or anticipate their challenges. So if I am going with the mindset that, okay, I am going to change your lives by giving you cups, no, I'm not doing that. I need to be able to understand, who am I working with? When they are on their periods and they're still working, they just have to remove the pad and they're doing the job that they are doing, and they go on with their day. So for me, it was just, okay, I thought cups would work for them perfectly, but it doesn't. So now we are exploring if menstrual disc, which is also a sustainable alternative, and one can have sexual intercourse with menstrual disc. Would this work for them? We haven't tried that yet. We are still having conversations. But when we did have those conversations, we came across cases where condoms were found stuck inside the vagina because of the lack of awareness or just not being able to understand how to remove it. So will a menstrual disc also create such a problem?
Yeah.
And that's again something that I am coming from a place कि okay नहीं इस कप नहीं काम किया तो शायद डिस्क करेगा. So you can't assume things and can't be inclusive if you're not talking to the person, and the solution needs to come from those people.
Yeah.
I can't go and say that okay, use this because this is good for the environment or whatever. But you tell me what is it that you think will work for you, and we'll see how we can facilitate that.
क्योंकि डोनेशंस या कुछ होता है ना, मतलब whenever anything happens, you know, just companies come कि ये हमारे पास है, ये प्रोडक्ट से ये दे दो.
Exactly.
ये ऑडियंस है, उनको अगर नहीं चाहिए वो, मतलब they don't, that's not their requirement. This empathetic approach and just understanding that where that person is standing, like this was shocking, that this was like completely shocking for me, and I don't know how they work during their period. This was shocking for me, absolutely. Like I can't
again,
even imagine.
Huge stigma of women being on periods, but it's the same men who isolate women in their homes to be away from them because they are menstruating, who then go and have sex with the sex workers because that's okay. So yeah, we're dealing with problems that are very, very it's intersectional. That's why I can't say like, okay, you know, periods or menstrual health is something that we have to work on.
Men and women education is very important. That's, and I think you're doing fabulous work with all of that. And you know, speaking so openly and so, you know, making these difficult talks, because this is something which is going to help people understand the story of a sex worker or anyone who is going through these fields, is going to educate the audiences even more and think and be empathetic towards each and every person. And I think when it comes to donations or when it comes to inclusivity, Badlav is really doing a Badlav.
That's too kind. Thank you. I think the idea is to build more sustainable communities. We don't want to keep working for the next 50 years to bring about that change. That is just not a sustainable approach. So.
No, but then when you're talking about sustainability, how do you emphasize this aspect of where we are leading in terms of climate change, when we are leading in terms of this thing? So you said that there's not a lot of awareness. Abhi bhi seriously nahi lete climate change ko. And then you have been advocating that alongside. You said that it is intersectional, that this is one thing, health is one of the factors you are focusing on, but at the same time sustainability, at the same time climate change, why everything is correlated and why everyone must be aware of their responsibility towards this.
I think it also comes from a place where if I am talking about something which is sustainable, cups for example,
correct,
I cannot convince you to use a cup just because it's going to be better for the waste management scenario that we have right now. Only if you find it comfortable and if you can afford it, will you be like, okay, I can afford it, it's better than pads for me, and environment ka bhi bhala ho raha hai. Then that's always the last priority. Anyway, for menstruator, the onus of waste management shouldn't lie on them. They are going through a lot on a monthly basis, irrespective.
Yes.
So, having said that, in any conversation with respect to climate change or sustainability, I think it boils down to how is it affecting you and the change that you make. How is it feasible for you? If switching, for example, the sex workers, if they are switching to the cups but they are facing so many challenges, it doesn't make sense for them.
Correct.
But for somebody like you and me who are working on ground, on the field, if that's a more comfortable option for us, we would opt that.
True.
Similarly, when it comes to other issues in climate change as well, how is it affecting you and how can you contribute towards leading a more sustainable life?
Correct,
without it being too heavy on your pockets.
True, that's important. Can you tell me the finances behind when we were doing that session? I loved that one point when you got the finances of a menstrual product, and then you so simply explained it to the girls that dekho, single-use plastic sanitary napkins cost for this, and this is the alternative, which is way cheaper and way affordable for you in the long term. ये 100 को दिख रहा है, ये 500 को दिख रहा है, पर इसकी ड्यूरेबिलिटी ज़्यादा है. Can you talk about these things and the alternatives which are there?
So talking about the cost factor, I think with what we've understood, an average person is spending a minimum of 50 rupees
True.
Monthly. And it can go up to 150 rupees depending on the brand, depending on different pads during the day and night. So let's even consider the bare minimum 50 rupees that a menstruator has to spend. And this is over a period of at least 35 to 40 years while you're menstruating. One typically starts their periods at the age of 12, 13 and it ends after 45. So even if we have like 30 good years of being on periods, which is very less.
Yes.
I'm taking it very conservatively, 50 rupees and 30 years. Monthly basis, you'll be spending a lot. More than 17,000-18,000 is being spent if you're spending 50 rupees.
Correct.
And this is for one menstruator at home. So if you have a mother or a sister or somebody else, it just multiplies. Whereas when you're using a cloth pad, a one cloth pad kit would typically cost, if we source it because we are an NGO, it's cheaper for us. But even if you're taking it from online markets, etc., maybe 1,000 to 1,200 rupees for the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
So in 30 years, you're barely spending 7,000-8,000 rupees,
which is quite okay.
Which is quite, and it's a huge reduction from what you were spending earlier.
Yeah.
When it comes to cups, it's even less because the cup's durability is 8 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So you're saving on a lot of money, and when we are talking to people from urban slums, low-income backgrounds, this is what is a motivating factor. Kachra is not the motivating factor, and it shouldn't be. Cost is. And after the cost, it's also the health. Am I feeling better? If cloth pad might be cheaper, but if it is not comfortable, then I will go back to using a conventional pad. So having these conversations, that's why the intersectional approach has to, yes, it is helping the environment, but it is also helping your pocket.
Correct.
And it is helping your health.
Yeah.
That's what is a more convincing factor than just saying that, oh, you're saving the environment.
But like I like the way you approach towards this, because जहाँ पे costing आता है, अभी EV का भी देख लो. People are buying EV, climate or saving electricity or whatever might be another thing, but वो सस्ता पड़ रहा है पेट्रोल डीजल से, इसलिए people are just going and buying EVs. That's the first factor they look at nowadays for buying EVs. वो छोड़ दो कि वो fossil fuel से आ रहा है पूरा, वो that's another thing which still has to be tackled, but same applies to the menstrual products and everything. So वो bamboo का जो रहता है, what is that single use bamboo? Is it also sustainable?
So with the research and studies that I've come across, it's definitely sustainably sourced. It is possible that it is compostable or biodegradable, but under certain conditions.
Okay.
So the problem that we have right now is because we already have so much of conventional sanitary pad waste. Once it mixes with, for example, the bamboo pads, which ideally can be degradable.
Correct.
But if it gets mixed with all the other wastes, then it's as good as your conventional pad.
Got it. Okay.
So unless you have a separate composting or degrading facility at home or something that you're monitoring, that's not the ideal product if you're looking at it in terms of the environment.
Okay.
But yes, of course, there have been studies that have also said that women find it more comfortable because it doesn't have plastic, so it doesn't have
the
woman
rashes
doesn't experience rashes.
Yeah.
So depending on what are we talking about, if you're talking about just in terms of the environmental aspect, no. But if you're talking about the comfort, then it depends from person to person, and
There was the biggest confusion because a lot of women buy the bamboo material pads thinking that they are contributing towards a more sustainable way of living and supporting the climate problem what we are facing right now. Now, you are into social entrepreneurship. right? And it is very different than the traditional entrepreneurship. Why do you think that the Gen Zs should opt for social entrepreneurship, and what is the future of that, and how does it differ from the regular entrepreneurship?
I very much believe that the Gen Zs are already opting for social entrepreneurship. I speak to so many students, and it doesn't have to be, oh, I want to solve this problem. They could just be having a fantastic business plan, which by default is working on some challenge that we are facing as a society, whether it's a social issue or an environmental issue, which I think is very much intersectional. But yeah, how it's different, I think traditional entrepreneurship is more competitive, whereas social entrepreneurship is ideally is collaborative. It is people-centric. Traditional entrepreneurship is based on the idea of capitalism. It might have social issues that they are taking care of, but it's very indirect.
Correct.
For example, the CSR funds.
Yes.
So the company could be doing whatever business, but their CSR projects are, for example, in education or women empowerment. But that's not the direct core work that they are a part of. Whereas in social entrepreneurship, people are the main focus. Community-centric development is the main focus. And collaborative and profit is secondary, and society is primary. So ideally, it's
a holistic way of looking at it. And when you're giving these examples, I also see a lot of beauty products, a lot of things which are vegan friendly. Then animal cruelty has been checked, and people are reading those labels, and then they're opting for the purchases. Now purchases are very consciously made these days by Gen Zs or our generation.
Absolutely.
So there is a lot of scope for social entrepreneurship, and we are setting right kind of examples. It is not only creating a balance between the climate problem what we are facing, but also way of living life more sustainably and coexisting.
I think market has created that demand. By market, I mean the Gen Zs or the millennials. By making that conscious choice where maybe just 5 years ago we didn't come across bamboo toothbrushes.
No.
Now even Colgate has entered that branch because they see there is an acceptability, there is a market for it. And the more conscious we get as humans and the choices that we make, I think there is a future.
There is a future. But when we talk about collaboration or the youth involvement, where do you see the crucial problem-solving method coming into picture? Particularly considering the social issues. Now I'm saying policy making, the NGOs and the companies need to work hand in hand to make a larger level impact. If you see that the policies are not supporting the NGOs, or the corporates taking years of time to give the CSR funds, how will anybody live by the circular economy model when nothing is working like a car where all the wheels are going in one direction? It's like har jagah wheels ja rahe hai, kuch bhi ho raha hai. So can you define that for me?
So I think there has to be that integration. Without that, you basically can't work. I don't think the governments or corporates would be able to work or function in the manner if NGOs weren't involved. When it comes to, I think your first part was the youth taking the decision, or how do you structure it in a way. I would go back to my answer of it has to be people-centric. It has to come from the people you're working with. You're not working for them, you're working with them. And then, of course, when it comes to policies or how cooperative or non-cooperative governments and companies can get, we are strongly advocating for a systemic change. Yes, I try to lead a more sustainable life. I try to advocate for sustainable life. But I know that the larger change that we all are working towards cannot happen if there is no systemic change. No matter how many products you replace by using more environment friendly products, the CO2 emissions or the greenhouse gases that just exist because of other corporate activities, they're not going to vanish away because I am using a bamboo toothbrush, or if I am a vegan, or if I am using a menstrual cup.
Yeah.
So we are all trying to, I think, at Badlaav, see how we can work towards a more systemic change. The work that we are doing, we try to have reports and we want to publish studies to be able to give a more solid proof of why we need such say curriculums in school, or why menstrual cups or cloth pads might be better, and how can we advocate for that, which will also then promote or give this push to the companies to invest in such kind of initiatives. Because what's happening right now is, if a company were to donate for conventional pads, normal sanitary pads, I can donate 10,000 in just a day without educating anyone, because everybody knows.
True.
And the company wants numbers. Everybody wants numbers. Even we want numbers. But at the end of the day, it's easier to do it.
Correct.
When we're talking about menstrual cups, in a day, I won't be even able to distribute 10. Because it requires education, it requires conversation, and the agency of choice. Even if I am distributing cups free, I don't want them to use it just because unko mil raha hai. They need to understand, and they need to want to use it.
Correct.
Just because it's sustainable, just because it's free,
they
are not bound to use it.
Yeah, that's true.
But then I'm not even distributing 10 versus 10,000 women who I could reach out to in a day if I'm distributing conventional pads. So I think everybody wants numbers, but we should really focus on deep-rooted impact than the fancy numbers that
That's absolutely true. Like, because I'll take you to one of the examples when we were discussing that you face a lot of issues, like the NGOs face a lot of issues with the local governance, the friction which is there between NGOs, the local governments, and trying to do the actual impact, you know. So that's why, can you give me that example? And this would be my last question to you, that how can everybody come together and work the way forward in this?
Sorry, which example? It's the coordination with the local authorities?
Yes, the coordination with the local authorities.
I think that's always just, in any kind of work that you're doing, that's going to be a process. But there are hurdles, especially because of the subject that we've chosen. Menstrual health still is a taboo. There are n number of people working on it, but it still remains to be a taboo. And unfortunately, most of the decision makers or people who give you the permission to work here or there are men. And most of the times they do not understand the issue. There is so much lack of awareness that this is also not a priority. For example, during the pandemic, the government forgot that there are menstruators and sanitary pads weren't in the essential items list. This came up later. When there was a demand from people कि अरे pads नहीं मिल रहे हैं, pandemic हुआ है, periods नहीं रुके हैं, is when the government realized, so this is because the decision makers are men, old men sitting doing this, unfortunately. So yeah, we definitely have problems like this, and it's not just always the men. Thanks to patriarchy, we also have other people, women or older women in the society who question or ask us what we are doing, who are not convinced as to why we are talking to people so deeply about menstrual cycle. Nobody spoke to them about it, and they are just fine. So is there a need for us to now come and talk to somebody about menstrual health or reproductive health or reproductive rights when they survived all of this without knowing any of it? So of course there are a lot of challenges that come up, but I think that's also what keeps us motivated and keeps us on our feet as to, okay, this is what we need to do next or work on.
No, but the takeaway from this is that there is a lot happening right now, and there is a lot of awareness coming up with the younger generations taking that charge of making this change happen. And the key takeaway for me is that there is still a lot of work that has to be done
Absolutely.
on multi levels. You know, the policy making, the education in the public spaces, truly bridging the gap between the ideology of men and women, the patriarchy, the on-ground issues and everything. And I think with the examples like Badlav, we are going there. We are going there. And I think with this
you.
whole unheard story of grit of Radhika, we might be able to reach or change or influence life of many others. So thank you, Radhika, for being a part of this wonderful
That's too kind. Thank you
conversation
so much.
I've had. I was really inspired and I learned a lot from you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and giving me this platform to share the story and the journey we've had so far. Thank you.
What do you think about Unheard Stories of Grit? What do you think is different with this?
I think just the fact that how candid this conversation was, or how I think I'd asked you, well, are there going to be cuts or edits like that? And you said no, we lose the chain of thought, so we will talk. And I think that's what's very different, and it's also very comfortable this way, and you don't have to be conscious about how you frame your answers. And just the fact that you had such wonderful questions and the team working and helping us get through this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today, and this is wonderful.
Thank you so much.
A beautiful conversation, and that's it. Thank you.